Thanks very much, Yvonne. I'd like to thank the organisers and especially Joe for the invitation to speak here. This is my first time in Glenties and I'm really enjoying it. Very relaxed sort of atmosphere. Pardon? I'm an academic economist. My job, I see it, is to raise questions for thought. I don't have all the answers. I suppose I see what I'm about to do, this essay I'm about to read, in effect, as an exercise in constructive dissent, maybe referring back to what Colin referred to earlier on. My main concentration is the question of whether our model of government is up to the challenge of leading our economy out of the current crisis. My focus will be economic development policy, which is the key long-term influence on prosperity. This is the motor that will get this economy growing again. Later I will turn to the implications of the argument for the political system. Before I get to the beef of the argument, I want to just briefly characterise the kind of government we have. In many ways, I'm repeating some of what's already been said. For me, Ireland seems to follow a model of big government. We have a highly centralised system where government reaches into many aspects of our social and economic existence. White papers, government strategies and task forces abound. Politicians claim to know what is right for the people, with decisions often being based on conviction. Experts are paid to spin or support the orthodoxy rather than to develop alternatives. Decisions are made for Ireland Incorporated and are delivered top-down by an elaborate centralised bureaucracy. The role for local democracy is minuscule, as Gemma already said. I'll come back to regional development later on. The system's, well, this is a question really. The system seems to be what the electorate wants. Many citizens seem to be happy to let someone else do the running. A majority believe that the government runs the economy. Our clientelist system means we have access to our politicians. Ministers favour their local areas with preferential treatment. We have 2 ministers in Cork. Waterford may be Munster champions. They don't have a ministerial car. These are the sorts of discussions we have. If things go wrong, the public can express their view at the ballot box. After all, that's what democracy is about, isn't it? Any talk of change is met with apathy, as indicated by the lack of public unrest in the current crisis. I recall Jean Kerrigan's article in the back of the Sunday Independent when he referred to any self-respecting democracy at this stage might have had a military coup. I like to read Jean Kerrigan. I think he's very provocative. The alternatives seem to be unrealistic, like expecting turkeys to vote for Christmas. Ireland has certain unique features which we should take into account when considering our model of government. First, our small size means that we are hugely affected by international fluctuations. To use a seafaring analogy, we are like a small dinghy being tossed around in choppy waters. Large countries are more like ocean-going liners that plough through the waters. I think Colin has already referred to this. This helps explain the large variations in our growth rate. Very few countries in the world have annual GDP growths of -9% and +11%. That's a 20% gap in the space of 10 years. We've had that. Our smallness, aided by the negotiating skills of our politicians and the fact that we were serial underperformers, also explains how we managed in the 80s to receive special treatment in Europe, especially our low corporation tax rate, which has proved to be crucial. There is absolutely no way that a big country could have got that special exemption we got then. Given the far reach of our government, our small size also means that government can have disproportionate effects, both positive and also negative. Secondly, our history does matter. We're a fledgling democracy with an inherited dependency culture. Our political system is conditioned to look outside, either for someone to blame or for seeking help. Historically, the UK was our bugbear. When faced with sluggish growth in the 80s, we turned to the EU for special treatment in relation to corporation tax, but also structural funds. The Celtic Tiger era witnessed a very strong reliance on the US. Even in the midst of the current crisis, a popular solution has been to appeal to the Irish diaspora. I went to you remember the 4 angry men who did the circuit, and I went to their talk down in Cork, Fintan O'Toole and Matt Cooper and these guys. And I was amazed at the discussion that went on there. At one stage, a young chap in the question and answer session at the end said basically he's come to the conclusion that we can't run this country ourselves. We should actually ask the IMF to come in and run it. You know, that was very disturbing for a young person to say that. It's almost like surrendering our independence. So this makes me ask, you know, do we ever face up to our own mistakes? We seem to prefer, from an economist perspective, we always seem to go for fixing the market. Such antipathy to the market implies that we overlook one of its main benefits, which is not only to guide decisions, but also to discover new knowledge. And I'll return to that point later on. As Colm has said, Irish-style big government has been error-prone. During the mid-80s and the present crisis, our public finances were in such disarray that the IMF was said to be almost at our door. How many other governments of developed economies have faced the ignominy of threatened national bankruptcy twice in the space of 30 years? Name them. There aren't any. In the 80s, following an international economic downturn sparked by the oil price shocks, it took the best part of a decade for the government to realise that public spending had to be axed. The present crisis has international origins, helped in no small way by recent government letting public spending run out of control. The suggestion that our big government engineered the Celtic Tiger growth spurt is actually very far from the mark. According to the official rhetoric, mostly due to our own policies, Ireland had become the preferred location for high-tech industry, predominantly of US origin. None of our domestic policies, such as investment in education, membership of the EU or even social partnership, explain the timing of the boom. The Celtic Tiger boom roughly started in 1993, around there then. The fact that high technology industries chose Ireland because of a booming US economy and freer trade within the EU, which is a direct result of the Single European Act, and because of its status as a tax haven for corporate profits, has been conveniently glossed over. I've had my knuckles rapped for referring to the fact that multinationals engage in transfer pricing, and this is a known fact. Well, you're not supposed to say that when you're writing consultancy reports for government. We don't like to be referred to as a tax haven, but we are a tax haven. The success of the Celtic Tiger was a result of the economic development policies of what has been referred to as industrialisation by invitation, striking a vein of good luck in the 90s. Our over-centralised system of government has led to institutional disorder. As Gemma has said, there's been system failures in transport, planning and health. High levels of inertia in the public service and public sector has also resulted in widespread inefficiency and poor quality services. We witnessed this in terms of, for example, inadequate public transport, the problems of urban sprawl and the mistreatment of children in need. Our system failures in banking have been extremely grave, and they've already been referred to. I won't go into those. In the present emergency, our government is notably reluctant to admit that their actions have contributed to the crisis. It was the same in the 80s. In the aftermath of that period, we hoped in vain that politicians would never repeat their mistakes. Their failure to learn suggests a clearly misplaced belief in government infallibility. The problem would seem to be that governments continually suffer from groupthink. They surround themselves with an elite consisting of policy advisors, consultants and spinners whose main function is to tell ministers what they want to hear. A key problem is the almost complete absence of evidence-based policy analysis. This malaise is a result of our big government model. There are too few dissenting voices, again echoing what Colm was saying, inside the corridors of power. Those who do offer alternative perspectives are either ridiculed as naive or accused of being resentful at not being part of the elite. Someone has said that to me directly. That's the reason you're angry. You haven't got any of the money. In this politically charged environment, decision-making is not only inefficient, it is also frequently misguided. I'm going to turn now to our economic development policies and move on to the smart economy policy, which I think is worth having a look at. Industrialisation by invitation was a policy to fast-track Irish economic development through state intervention. The idea was to embed the multinationals in the local economy, with the result that clusters of indigenous businesses would appear around them. By having access to frontier technology in these businesses, the Irish workforce would upskill, with some going on to found their own business. In the midst of the domestically driven boom of the last decade, it is difficult to reach an objective assessment of the success of this strategy. There's absolutely no doubt that the foreign-owned sector has been hugely effective in delivering thousands and thousands of jobs and considerable wealth in the last 20 years. It continues to be our saviour at the moment. If you look at the export numbers, the export performance has been quite strong, but it's attributable to one sector, and that's the pharmaceutical sector. However, there are strong concerns about the embeddedness of multinationals. A successful strategy would have resulted in resilient clusters, in which, as businesses close down, including the multinationals themselves, new start-ups emerge organically to replace them. Typically, this is not what has happened when faced with multinational closures. There's a clamour for politicians and state agencies to set up task forces to look for replacement industries. As a result, the IDA pipeline is as relevant now as it ever was. If the strategy was to be deemed a long-run success, there would be no need for a pipeline. Indeed, in these circumstances, state intervention might not be required, as flourishing entrepreneurial activity as a response to market opportunities might materialise. The government's current smart economy policy is to target high technology sectors and source innovation by commercialising science and technology developed in universities to boost competitiveness and national prosperity. This policy is fundamentally flawed in assuming that a government or its agencies can decide on the sectors and businesses in which Ireland will be competitive, and that academics can play a central role in business innovation. It's well known that science-based innovation is high risk. It's very far from the market, and that's why it's high risk. We were told last weekend by Minister O'Keefe that the number of university spin-offs has risen from 8 in 2006. University spin-offs are where academics set up businesses, to 35 in 2009. Whatever about the number, there are some serious issues, worries about this sort of phenomenon, the phenomenon of the university spin-off in a small open economy like ours. The survival rate for these so-called early adopters, these are the first businesses with the technology, is very low. There's international evidence to suggest that. And most of the commercial success accrues to late adopters, not early adopters. From an Irish perspective, this may represent a poor return to the taxpayer, especially if, as may very well be the case, the late adopters are foreign-owned. The alternative, market-driven innovation, which focuses on the users of technology, is a much safer and, I would say, smarter bet. The high level of politicisation of the market process has resulted in a new policy of innovation by invitation. Only the so-called smart, high technology or knowledge-based businesses need apply. The IDA pipeline remains the only game in town. Our economic development strategy continues to be intimately linked to the fortunes of multinationals, whose main reason for favouring Ireland remains its tax haven status. The strategy is prone to risks that are very far from our control, such as being exposed to adverse shocks in the narrow range of sectors in which we specialise, and indeed policy shifts by other governments, especially the US, to tax havens. Added to this are the risks of capturing for Ireland the proceeds of new knowledge, which supposedly results from the research and development activity conducted here. Whatever happened to the idea of a broad-based, decentralised economic development strategy? The smart economy policy, which is heralded as our long-term growth strategy, therefore seems to be risking increasingly scarce taxpayers' money on initiatives of doubtful value, but also, and perhaps more damagingly, discriminating against existing and potential entrepreneurs in wealth-creating sectors not favoured by government. The bias towards fourth level and science is grossly misplaced. Indeed, efforts to discriminate at second level against subjects other than maths are unwise. The Innovation Task Force report has been the latest throw of the dice. It's full of you should read it. It's full of far-flung aspirations, woolly argument and arbitrary targets that ultimately fail to conceal the self-interest seeking behaviour of politicians, business interests and lobbies involved. This was indeed identified by On Board SNP, which actually referred to an absence of a verifiable economic return from all of this investment. The question is, where is the cost-benefit analysis for this smart economy experiment? To advocate, as the government does, that science-based innovation is the key to Ireland's future is wrong-headed and a huge gamble as far as I'm concerned. Paradoxically, I would say the smart economy policy lacks ambition. Instead of facilitating the organic emergence of innovative businesses in any sector or location, we seek to corral it into particular businesses, sectors or indeed places. Instead of running with the market, our inherited mindset is to fix it. Our centralised government, with its over-specialised institutional structure and its support of sexual interest, is ill-equipped to support truly innovative businesses that emerge sporadically in diverse sectors throughout our country. It seeks to control rather than be responsive to genuinely well-creating businesses. A critical mass of these businesses in a range of diverse sectors represents our nation's greatest chance of surviving these challenging times. The government seems to have little faith in the ingenuity of the Irish population to find their way out of the crisis. Entrepreneurship has been largely written off, yet risk takers, using the discipline of the market, are always more likely than bureaucrats to make worthwhile decisions as their livelihoods depend on it. Why should we doubt the creativity of the Irish, which has achieved worldwide recognition in business, sport and arts? This, allied to the resourcefulness of the many foreign nationals now living here, is the real key to our survival. In the next years, as we struggle to recover from this deep crisis, citizens may begin to demand more responsibility, especially when our big government model is shown to yield depressingly disappointing results. The only solution to these deeply ingrained problems is for a root and branch review of our political institutions and the functioning of government departments and agencies. Perhaps a good starting point for redesigning our economic development strategy would be to reflect on the words of one of our most successful political leaders, Sean Lemass. I was very taken by Tom Garvin's book on Sean Lemass. He stated in 1954 that the less the government is brought into the operations of a private business enterprise, the more successful that business will be. I go to conferences and I see examples of innovative businesses. The more they are supported by government, the lower their chances of survival. It's obvious, it's intuitive. We don't seem to get that message at all. Lemass had it. He had a strong belief in the important role for economic development of a properly regulated enterprise sector. He was personally incorruptible and was supportive of a developed welfare state. So if we were to imagine what our government should look like, in my view, it would be a leaner government, stripped of all unnecessary expenditure by agencies and task forces on picking winners and placating the lobbies. This would be a government that concentrates on removing obstacles to entrepreneurship and focuses on providing an environment in which businesses can prosper. For example, it would address inadequate facilities in our primary and secondary schools and our chronic shortage of high-speed broadband. At the same time, it would ensure a level playing field through regulation and would scrupulously avoid bailing out businesses that fall foul of competition. Instead, it would concentrate taxpayers' money on looking after the needy in our society, such as the mentally ill and the poor. It would establish an equitable health system and it would re-energise local democracy. This vision of a leaner, more caring and smarter government is based on a pragmatic view that there must be a better way. The left-right ideological debate is, to me, unhelpful in charting a path to recovery. The fatal flaw of the left is a dislike of the discipline of the market and a promotion of what often is an inefficient public sector. The defects of the right is the endemic corruption at the nexus of the state and business interests. A leaner, more caring and smarter government might result if political reforms were introduced. This might include significant reduction in the number of TDs, which would focus our parliamentarians more on national policy making. A more vibrant local government providing a range of public services for decentralised economic development strategies funded out of local taxation might be more efficient and responsive to local needs. In addition, from an economic development perspective, a more vibrant local democracy would overcome our one-size-fits-all approach, whereby Irish regions and cities are clones of each other. All you have to do is take a look at the development plans of Irish regions and cities. You'll find that they all want to be exactly the same thing: high-tech, knowledge-based, attractive to multinationals. Through regional specialisation, we might have a more balanced portfolio of industries, including multinationals, which might be a source of both greater growth and stability in the long term. The necessary reforms will almost certainly mean smaller central government with the likely emergence of stronger local government, which supports rather than controls and which only intervenes after careful analysis of costs and benefits. In short, it would mean a smart government for a smart people. One wonders whether our political system is capable of delivering the fundamental change that's urgently required. Perhaps more important, one wonders whether our citizens are actually up for the challenge. Thanks very much.